Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, or welcome. My name is Anastasia. I don't know if I've ever said that in any of my videos. My channel name is Little Owl Psychology because I am a little woman. I do feel that I have the spirit of an owl and I love psychology, so that's why. So today's video, I will be talking about conflict. Conflict was a major theme in my life this year, and the events of my life really pushed me to look more closely into what conflict is and how to have conflict more productively, and not to avoid it, because I have an issue with avoiding conflict, and by avoiding conflict I actually created more conflict. So that's something I'm still working on, and realizing too that by avoiding conflict, especially in romantic relationships, it can be pretty detrimental to not only yourself, but it erodes the relationship if you're not willing to have hard conversations in a productive way. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to lay out the video as such. So first, I'm going to discuss the importance of maintaining curiosity within conflict and kind of holding a researcher's perspective while trying to understand another person. The anecdote for defensiveness is curiosity, so I'm going to explain that a little bit as well. Secondly, I will discuss what we are really fighting about when we fight with people. Thirdly, I will discuss what actually is toxic in a relationship. That is a word that is thrown around so much, so I'm going to get really deep into that to really, I guess, explore like what is actually toxic and when are we just throwing that word around because we can't think of a better word, right? And lastly, I'm going to discuss strategies on how to fight productively. So let's get started. Alright, before I begin, I want to credit these incredible thinkers for offering the work that they do to the world, because a lot of these concepts that I know now, that I've learned, have come from watching these people's videos, listening to their podcasts, and reading their books. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to list all of them now. And you know, if you want like further information outside of this video that I'm making, I highly, highly, highly recommend looking into every single one of these names, because I would not know what I know now if it weren't for them. So I'm gonna list them now. So Matthew Hussey, freaking amazing, changed my life. Esther Perel, same. Jordan Dan, who's gonna be on my channel next month. I'm so excited. Jay Shetty, amazing podcast called On Purpose. Jackson McKenzie, who is the author of Whole Again, and Dr. Nicole LaPera. Dr. Nicole LaPera, I think that's how you pronounce it. Amazing freaking Instagram platform. Incredible book called How to Do the Work. She talks a lot about relationships and like what's actually happening psychologically. I could not be more grateful for the work these people have offered online, and to have access to it, so thank you. And yeah, so now let's get started. Now I want to start off with this quote by Matthew Hussey, which says, "It's not that our partner can't handle our wounds, it's that they can't handle our weapons." And I feel like that is just so goddamn true. Like when we get really reactive and really defensive and arguing, and we become passive aggressive, and we get really like snippy, and we start expecting things from the other person because we're not communicating our needs effectively, or like assuming the freaking worst, like we make it really hard for the other person and ourselves to like open up emotionally and really talk about like what's going on inside of us, because if you come with your weapons raised, then people are both going to be responding from their protective self instead of their authentic self. So when we come into an argument like this, we set the conflict up for failure. I know that conflict can be incredibly triggering, believe me, I know. But if we can do all that we can to be present and curious, I honestly think it can do wonders for our relationships. Curiosity is the antidote for defensiveness. Lengthening that space between curiosity and jumping to conclusions literally saves relationships. There's this quote that I love, and it says, "The greatest sign of human intelligence is to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." And I feel like you could do that, and you should do that on an individual level, but I feel like you can also do that in a relationship. Nothing is fixed, right? Except for maybe your non-negotiables. But I feel like a really healthy perspective that you could bring into conflict is, to think like that the fight or the conflict can be viewed as an opportunity to evolve a misunderstanding. Like if you're able to say like, okay, we could both like bring up our point of view and discuss each other's and kind of see like, okay, this is what you think, this is what I think. All right, how do our perspectives kind of dance together? And I feel like that's opening up a space for curiosity about each person's perspective without being like super highly identified with what it is that you're thinking. And like I said, of course, there's going to be things where you're like, no, I will not, push my boundaries on this, which we should have that as well. But I think that more often than not, we can have a little bit more flexibility with certain things that don't go against our values. At the same time, I think it's really difficult to argue with somebody who has a very fixed mindset. Like, it should be this way. You should know this. You should already understand this. It's like, okay, but we all don't go through the same experiences in life, and we all don't have like the same assignments in this life. So it's like, maybe you learned something that I don't know, and maybe I've learned something that you don't know. And to expect that somebody knows everything you know is ignorant. It's ignorant. Another really great perspective to hold going into conflict is to be aware of how wrong it is possible to be. So you really go into something with curiosity, like, because if you go into something and you're like, I am right, and I'm gonna convince you that I'm right at all costs and you are wrong, it's just like, again, like that fixed mindset and kind of setting up the conflict for failure. If somebody is coming at you with their weapons, right? It's important to be curious, like, what is behind the weapon? What is the deeper need behind the weapon being raised? Another aspect of curiosity is not giving up, right? I mean, I think it's important to take breaks. Like if you're like, hey, I'm getting really heated right now, my nervous system is freaking all over the place, or however you want to say it, and you're like, let's take a moment, let's talk about this at a different time. That's different. I don't think that's giving up. That's taking a little bit of a step back or break. But a saying that I freaking hate is this phrasing, let's agree to disagree, right? Because for me, that phrasing is like low investment. It's like, I'm done here. We're done talking. We're never gonna reach an understanding of each other. It's like, well, why not? You know what I mean? Like, okay, we don't have to have like the same perspective, but I can still understand you. Like, that's possible. So when people say like, let's agree to disagree, I feel like that's fine in like a debate on like something political with somebody you're not close to. But when it's like your partner, it's like, come on. Because I feel like when you say like you're done talking, basically what you're saying is like, I'm done talking, that doesn't lead to further intimacy. That doesn't lead to further understanding of this person that you have intimately, in your life. It's okay to be differentiated, right? Like, it's okay to be two different people. What I think is not okay is when you're not trying to like really get to know the person you're with and try to understand them. Like, understanding someone does not mean that you're the same person. Understanding someone means that you've gotten to know them and that you empathize with them and you understand that people have different experiences in life, and that as valid as your own experiences in the world, so is this person's, and you appreciate it for what it is. I've been working with a relationship coach recently. She is phenomenal, and something that she told me is she was like, don't think of things as like compromise, but think of things in a relationship as a collaboration, right? Like, it's a co-creation. Like, your relationship with a person is a very unique phenomena that is up to you and that person. I think like when we think of compromise, it's like someone or both are going to be unhappy with the outcome, right? It's not a win-win situation, but a collaboration is. So kind of thinking in that way, I think also opens us up to curiosity. Like, okay, creatively, how can we do something where we both like the outcome. Lastly, another good piece of advice in terms of being curious. So like I said, like sometimes we are so deeply triggered in conflict, right? That we may be with someone, or we may be someone who has difficulty talking in conflict. And I think it's important to be aware of that, right, when somebody does, and to be curious, why do you have a difficulty with conflict? Or why does your partner have difficulty with conflict? Like, what is blocking them from talking about the issue? And be curious about that. Love is understanding someone, I really feel. Alright, so now I'm going to go into what are we really fighting about when we fight. Now, I'm really grateful for this imagery from Jordan Dan. On her Instagram profile, she has that, when people sit with her in her, sessions in therapy, there are 4 people in the room. The present self of each person and the past self of each person. And if that's not true, I don't know what is. But I also feel like that comes up in conflict, right? Like when we have conflict, all these things are triggered. Conflict that we had in past relationships, conflict that we had with our parents, how we witnessed our parents have conflict, right? That all comes right into play because conflict, like to our system and to our brain, it triggers all these survival mechanisms, these coping mechanisms. So all this shit is inflamed. It's not funny, but it's just funny to me now because I didn't realize this for so long, but it's like all this crap is inflamed inside of us when we have conflict. And it takes, we have to learn about this, right? Like we have to seek this information out, because if we don't, then we have no idea what we're doing for the most part, right? Now, I think the only time when, the past is not there in a conflict is if both people are like immensely present. And probably over time, if you build like a really great connection with the person, the past probably dissipates, I would imagine. But our past is usually the thing that's getting in the way of us having conflict productively, because we're afraid of the past repeating. What I think that essentially, like at bottom, what we're really afraid of repeating is not having our attachment needs met. Instead of letting someone into our wounds, our weapons are up, ready for battle, so that the wound isn't touched or shown, or worse, made deeper. That's what we're afraid of, right? But because we are operating from protective self, we aren't able to be authentic or vulnerable. And those are the only spaces where we can cultivate true connection. As I'm sure many people have heard about in society, is that people are like, oh my gosh, what's your attachment style? For many years, I was like, I don't know. And I was like looking it up on Wikipedia, and I was kind of like, well, okay, I don't really know what it is. But I recently discovered the Secure Relationship Instagram account. Amazing how, I think her name is Julie, how she breaks these things down, and finally I was able to identify what my attachment style is because of how she so brilliantly breaks things down, and even goes so far as to talk about like things you kind of hear yourself say if you do have a certain attachment style. So, essentially there are 4, and it's anxious, avoidant, disorganized, and secure. Most of us find ourselves in anxious, avoidant relationships where that cycle is happening between 2 people. I'm going to go into the basic needs of each of those attachment styles. And hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into, the needs that we are so afraid of not being met in our relationships. So first I'm going to go into the basic needs for an anxious partner, and I got this from the Secure Relationship Instagram. So the basic needs for an anxious partner are to know you'll be there when I need you, to know I'm valuable to you, to feel wanted, to be emotionally validated, which is especially important for anxious partner, to know that I'm not too much, and to know you won't abandon me. Now, the basic needs for an avoidant partner are to know you appreciate my efforts and see what I'm getting right, to be seen as successful in your eyes, to know that my needs matter to you, to know that you trust my love, to know it's okay to be weak sometimes, and to know that you want me. So I really feel that underneath all of our fights, these basic needs are there, you know, in the base of the fight. But Esther Perel, she's identified 3 underlying dynamics underneath all fights. So I kind of see this as, you know, the basic needs dressing up in these 3 costumes. That's kind of how I see it, because I feel like there's layers of things happening when people are having conflict. Like I said, I think the very, very initial root is this like attachment need. And then above that are these underlying dynamics. And then there's the thing that you think you're fighting about. So I feel like there's 3 levels. That's my theory. But Esther Perel, she identifies the 3 underlying dynamics underneath all fights. The first is power and control, which is whose priorities matter more. The second is care and closeness, which is essentially trust, you know, which is, can I count on you? And the third is respect and recognition, which is, do you value me? So I think when we're fighting, if we're able to kind of be like, okay, well, let's take a moment and it's like, so this is the thing we're fighting about, right? And what is this fight actually about? Is it about care and closeness? Is it about, you know, power and recognition? And if it is, okay, what's underneath that power and recognition? I want to feel like this is a collaboration. I want to feel like my needs matter and your needs matter. So then that goes deeper into the attachment needs, right? So I think if we're able to like be like, okay, here's the surface, here's a little bit deeper, and here's the deepest. And I think like being able to see that will be absolutely remarkable for our relationships. So now we're gonna go into what is actually toxic. In our current like social climate, there's so many buzzwords right now, which is like narcissism, you're a narcissist, toxic, you're toxic, and like red flags. And I feel like those 3 things, like so many people are using it as a way to like understand and describe something. And what it really lacks is like nuance, right? And complexity in relationships. And also when there's like other things happening that aren't based in narcissism or toxicity or red flags. And so I really wanted to talk about this. So the word toxic, I looked it up, like the etymology of the word. And it comes from, it means poisonous, right? Very bad, unpleasant, or harmful. And the word harm means to cause damage. So I guess I understand toxicity as something that causes damage to a person. So something I think is genuinely toxic is when someone makes you completely responsible for their own emotional state. That is toxic as fuck. I think conventionally, we have a pretty skewed idea of what vulnerability is. And I want to go into that a little bit because vulnerability is not repeatedly throwing your insecurity at someone like 10 times a day and consistently reminding them of how something is making you feel, you know, insecure or jealous. Because that's not vulnerability, that is dumping, and you're making that person responsible for your own emotional state every time you feel it. We have to take ownership of how we feel as well, right? Vulnerability is still where there is an ownership of your feelings. It's saying like, okay, I'm insecure about this and I'm making you aware of this, and I'm not gonna make you aware of it every single time I feel it because I have to do that work myself, but I'm gonna talk to you about it, right? I'm gonna let you know, hey, this is like happening inside of me, and you know, we're exposing that, which helps to allow somebody in. And we have to be willing to discuss and figure out like, where is this coming from? It's not being used to manipulate another person or the outcome of a situation. Vulnerability should be used for someone to understand you more and for you to understand someone else more. So I don't think vulnerability is saying like, I feel insecure about this person, so you can't talk to them. I don't think that that's true, like vulnerability. I think True vulnerability is saying, hey, I'm feeling some insecurities and a little jealousy around this person that, you know, you're friends with or whatever it is. I just want to discuss, you know, maybe I have the wrong idea about things. I don't know if this is like a true fear or if this is just something from my past, but I want to have a discussion so we can figure out how we can both feel comfortable in this situation. You see how everything is owned and not projected in that example? And I think it's really important to do that because we don't want our partners to feel controlled by our insecurities and our jealousies, because I don't think that's fair. And I think that when we make our partners feel completely responsible or controlled by our insecurities and our jealousies, that's toxic. Toxicity, I think, is also when you are vulnerable and the other person makes it worse. When you are convinced the other person did everything wrong. If you are convinced that the other person in your relationship did everything wrong, then you're the toxic one. Really. I mean, except in like really extreme situations where that person was consistently cheating on you, maybe, or abusing you, of course, like then, okay, maybe then. But if that was not the case and you're like, you did everything wrong, it's all your fault, you're the toxic one. Okay, I'm sorry, but you are. Now, particularly in conflict, what I think is truly toxic is the negative cycle that is created between two people. Convincing them, you know, of your own reality, one-upping each other, like that whole thing, right? You start to create like this negative cycle between you. You create like a third entity, honestly, and it becomes, you know, about the person and not about the issue anymore. When you start criticizing and degrading the person instead of finding a solution and trying to understand the other, it becomes like this, like there's no getting off. It just becomes like this tilt-a-whirl in a circle where you're right and I'm wrong. I'm gonna convince you, I'm gonna one-up you, you did something worse, etc. Like that negative cycle is what is really toxic. I really recommend following The Secure Relationship on Instagram. She has a negative cycle highlight wheel where she really goes into what the negative cycle is. And like when I read this, it blew my mind because I was like, wow, like, you know, we oftentimes be like, you're toxic, this is toxic, you are toxic. And it's like the negative cycle is often like co-created. That is oftentimes the thing that is actually toxic. And if we both could take a step back and not contribute to the negative cycle, you know, then your conflict may not essentially have to become toxic. All right, so lastly, I'm going to talk about strategies on how to fight. I wish I knew this a long time ago because I felt for so long that kind of how you fight is like debating, right? It's like, all right, I'm gonna come with my best argument forward and you're gonna come with your, and let's see who's gonna win. It's like, oh my god, was I wrong? There's so many different strategies to fight, and I'm gonna share a number of them with you right now. So first, and I think this is one of the most remarkable strategies, is when somebody comes to you about something and they're like, hey, I don't like this, don't respond with a feeling. The first thing you should literally like train your brain to do is to repeat what they said and to keep repeating what they said until you get it exactly right. And once you repeat what they said, then you relay to them what you heard, and then you respond with a feeling. That's such a great formula, because if you're like, okay, so you're saying that I didn't clean the kitchen. Yes. Okay, what I'm hearing you say is that I don't clean enough, I don't like help out enough. Yes, you don't help out enough. Okay, well that makes me feel really sad because I don't like to make you feel that way, and etc. Like, I know it sounds kind of like cheesy, but like if you do that, right, and you respond with a feeling last, then you're not contributing to that like negative cycle like so quickly. So I think it's such a great way to think of approaching a fight initially. Always remember to own your emotions first, and speaking from a place of like what's happening inside of you first. You say, okay, well that makes me feel really sad because I don't like to make you feel that way. At the same time, like I think I contribute quite a bit, but let's have a discussion on ways that maybe I can contribute more, or we can kind of address where maybe you don't see what I do or notice it as much. Like you could just have a conversation. So when it comes to anger, this is one of the most beautiful ways I've heard anger kind of broken down. And I'm gonna read it. It says, when it comes to anger, for the person who's angry, learn to explain your anger, not just express your anger. So here's an example. So just expressing your anger, you're like, oh, fuck you, I'm triggered, you're doing this to me. Versus, I'm angry right now because I feel out of control and like the past is repeating. I'm afraid you'll hurt me like this person did. Which one is more productive? Now you can say the latter, with your voice raised. I think that's okay, right? Because anger, sometimes we're like, no. But what we're saying when we're angry is so important. I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of when it comes to feeling anger. I think what is not cool are the things we say when we're angry. But if you can harness that rage and that anger and be like, I don't like this, this is what I'm afraid of, and this is what I feel out of control of. Like, if you can do that, how freaking productive would anger be? And I know, like, when a lot of people get angry, they just see red and they're out of their rational mind. At the same time, though, I don't think it's impossible, and I think it's very possible to do this. And holy shit, how awesome would this be for people who have issues with anger? One really great thing I heard Esther Perel say was, if you want to try and change someone else, change your approach. Like, if you come at someone like attacking them, they are naturally going to be defensive, right? That is a human survival instinct. But if you're like, all right, I keep coming up to this person and I'm yelling at them and I'm attacking them, let's say that I come up to them with more of I guess like a demeanor of like understanding and calmness, and maybe they're gonna respond to me in a more healthy way, and I'm gonna guarantee you that most of the time that's gonna work. Okay, and if it doesn't work, well, then there's another issue you have to address. Establishing emotional safety is so important when you're having conflict, because if both people don't feel emotionally safe, it's going to be very difficult to have important conversations. And I think how you create emotional safety is by being emotionally validating. And so when it comes to emotional validation, I had this all messed up in my head before, but I thought that emotionally validating someone means that you agree with them. It doesn't. Thank God. You don't have to agree, that's the thing. But like the key thing is that you have to empathize with that person's feelings. Like, recognize just what they're feeling. Like, you just have to recognize that they are feeling the way that they do. There's an incredible example from the Secure Relationship on her Instagram account. The example says, your partner is upset because they believe you intentionally did something to hurt them. You understand they are hurt, but you don't agree your actions were intentional. For you, it was a miscommunication. So you say, I can't agree that I intentionally hurt you because that wasn't my experience at all. At the same time, I know what it feels like to have hurt feelings, and I'm really sorry for that. It makes sense to me you'd be sad if you thought I was deliberately trying to hurt you. I would be sad about that too. When I read that, I was like, holy crap, like, I wish I knew this years ago. But I feel like we often, we get stuck in trying to convince the partner that they shouldn't feel the way they feel because we're like so convinced of our own reality. But by just being able to be like, I see why somebody could feel that way. I understand those feelings of loneliness. I understand the feelings of anger. At the same time, that wasn't my experience, and these were my intentions. One of the most amazing things that Matthew HUSSEY has shared in his videos is like, yes, your feelings are valid, but the rationale behind why you're feeling those feelings aren't always valid. And I think it's important to recognize that feelings are valid, but the rationale can be discussed. At least that's how I'm understanding it now. It's important to use both and statements. I think people get really triggered by but. But, you know, you're just like, you know, you're not listening to me if you say, like, you know, at the same time, or, you know, and, like, this I think will really help. And also just thinking in terms of, like, a team. Holy crap, I wish I knew that. For so long I was like, it's me against you, right? But as I've gotten older, I'm like, okay, when you're in a relationship with somebody, it's a team effort. It's a collaboration. I'm not leaving you out on the wayside, and you're not leaving me out on the wayside. Let's figure this out, two minds together, not just one. Also asking the person, you know, instead of assuming what you think that person needs, asking them, how can I best support you right now? Learning to become psychologically healthy ultimately does help our relationships, because our relationships show us what's really going on inside of our minds. So thank you everybody who continues to return, and thank you to any newcomers on my channel. I appreciate you so much. I hope that the ideas and strategies and perspectives that I offered in this video help you, and you carry it with you throughout your life to have healthy and more fulfilling relationships.